A variety of things are happening in Africa. For that, we're joined by Georja Calvin-Smith here in studio. Georgia, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. This is Africa News. And today we're going to hear from the president of the African Development Bank to discuss what's driving African economic growth, whilst South Africa moves to boost renewable energy ahead of the expected increase in demand. Also, Mali's biggest northern city faces the first shelling since Islamists were driven out earlier this year. And in the first of our series on undocumented African workers here in France, our correspondents take us on the road. First up, Africa Rising was the topic for around 500 business, political and finance heavyweights gathered here in Paris today to discuss the continent's economic successes and what work's left to do. The Ivorian Prime Minister Daniel Duncan was joined by finance and banking chiefs and investors at the OECD's Africa Forum. Whilst growth in the region continues to surge, the revenue that comes with that doesn't seem to be trickling down to enough of Africa's poorest. Well, for a closer look at the continent's economic report card, the president of the African Development Bank, Mr. Donald Kaberuka, tells us more about what Africa's doing right and where it's still got some catching up to do.
First of all, let me confirm these facts that the size of the African economies have doubled since 2000, if you adjust for inflation. That has never happened before. The economies are growing very strongly, but I think people should be aware that we come from a long way. We still have a long way to go. So you have to nuance the Africa Rising story with the journey still to be traveled. Now, as the economies expand, population is expanding as well. Because part of the issues driving economic growth is the demographics, the increasing number of the people. So it's like running on a conveyor belt, which is going in the opposite direction. We have to do much more than 5%. At the minimum, we have to do 7%, maybe for a decade and a half or more, as China and Asia has done. So it takes some time. That is why we find that jobs are limited. That's why we find that transformation is still limited. So we have a long way to go, although we have done quite well.
So you're saying transformation is limited, jobs are limited. What is needed to fill in that gap between the positive numbers in terms of growth and the expectations for I think according to a recent survey, up to 50% of Africans who say that they don't feel that they're benefiting from the continent's rise?
First of all, a nuance. Poverty levels have been coming down to 48% from, as high as 60% a decade ago. You remember the lost decade in the 80s, early 90s. But they're not coming down fast enough. The number of African children dying before 5 has declined. So there are some benefits to the population. But what I'm saying here is that because the population is increasing, we have to move faster than we are at the moment. If your economy is expanding because the price of copper is higher, it does not mean that much has happened in the agricultural sector. And that's where people are. That's where jobs are created. So what we have to do is to do those things which bring jobs to Africa. We have to resolve issues of energy, of transport, of skills, which will make factories located in Africa, and that's how we shall create jobs.
Mr. Donald Kaberuka there joining us a little earlier. Well, as African nations push for sustainable growth, the role of renewables in providing the energy for expanding economies and populations is becoming more important. France 24's Caroline Dumais and Aisha Ahmed sent us this report from South Africa.
Just the right spot. In 2008, the Darling Wind Farm was meant to be a pilot project, but it exceeded expectations and has become a model farm. Its success has led to shareholders financing other turbines to finalize the second phase of the project.
It's a new thing. There's a lot of criticism in the beginning, but as people come to site and see what's really involved in the wind energy, they're quite positive when they're leaving. So yes, they're happy, I would say. And this is definitely the future for South Africa.
Electricity produced here is going straight to the national grid. Other wind farms have sprung up across the country. South Africa is making efforts to develop its natural resources, not only wind but solar energy too. Pretoria has set a target of equipping 1 million households with solar heated geysers by 2014. And this opposition member of parliament believes there has definitely been a shift in the government's mindset.
Before, our energy plans would be solely built around coal. What we are in fact now seeing is that there is a mix that's coming in there. And renewables are playing a far larger part in our 20-year energy plan. So about 42% of our new energy capacity will in fact be renewables.
However, more than 90% of South Africa's electricity generated is still fueled by coal. And South Africa is busy building one of the largest coal plants in the world. But the Medupi power station will become one of the biggest polluting projects.
Coal is a good choice. In many people's eyes, it might not be necessarily the right choice. But for South Africa, with its growth right now, I think it's probably the most wise choice that one could make now.
As local energy demand is expected to double by 2030 and increasing pressure from international partners to decrease carbon emissions, South Africa has no other choice but to exploit its renewable resource potential.
Look at some other world news now, and in Mali, locals suspect radical militants of being behind the shelling of the northern city of Gao early Monday. Malian soldiers still in a coma after the attack, the first on Gao since a French-led military intervention wrested the north back from jihadist fighters. Now, the French army is not speculating on who's responsible for the shelling, but troops have reportedly headed out to its suspected source. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb claimed responsibility for a recent suicide attack on Timbuktu, in which at least 2 civilians were killed. Meanwhile, a Kenyan man was the target of a Navy SEAL raid in Somalia over the weekend, say US officials. Mohammed Abdul Qadir, or Ikrima, reportedly works with Somali al-Shabaab militants and planned attacks in Kenya. Ikrima may have escaped the offensive. Al-Shabaab claims one of its members, though, was killed in the attack in the town of Barawe, and that Ikrima does not exist. Meanwhile, another US raid in Libya led to the capture of an alleged al-Qaeda operative linked to the 1998 bombings of US embassies in Africa. Secretary of State John Kerry on Monday insisted that the seizure of Abu Anas al-Libi is legal, but he remained cagey when asked if Washington had informed Tripoli in advance about the raid.
We regularly consult with our friends in the region. We consult regularly with the Libyan government on a range of security and counterterrorism issues, but we don't get into the specifics of our communications with a foreign government or in any kind of operation of this kind.
Ethiopia's got a new head of state. Parliament voted in former ambassador to Turkey, Mulatu Teshomi, for a 6-year presidential term on Monday. It's largely a symbolic and ceremonial post, though, with the real power resting in the hands of Prime Minister Haile Mariam Desalegn. Well, this week we'll be taking every day a look at different issues surrounding the difficulties faced by undocumented African workers here in France. When socialist Francois Hollande was elected as president last year, many hoped getting papers would become more straightforward. But the struggle continues and the beat goes on. This report by France 24's Eva Irvine and Sonia Patricelli.
Refusing to remain invisible, these illegal immigrants want the French government to give them the papers they need to work and live properly. Azouman Sissoko moved from Mali in 1993 to make money for himself and his family at home. He worked on the black market for years before getting a temporary permit just a few months ago.
We want Mr. Valls' set of criteria to be suspended, and we want all illegal immigrants to be granted papers.
Marching for a month across hundreds of kilometres, some of those protesting had to take days away from work in order to be present.
I've come straight from work, and all my comrades here have work. I've worked here for 18 years. Do you think it's normal that I'm still in this situation?
During his campaign, French President François Hollande promised that clear criteria would be laid out for illegal immigrants and their cases would be examined individually. It has become easier for families, minors, and indeed somewhat for job seekers, but they still need to prove that they have been in France for the last 5 years and have worked 8 months during the last 2.
We can see today that the criteria are unsuitable because on one hand we're required to have payslips in order to get our work documents, but at the same time the law states that it's illegal to take on any job before you have those very documents. So you see there's a problem.
In Aubervilliers, the protest ends with a meeting at the town hall. The delegates are told that the mayor understands but isn't in a position to change a lot. Nonetheless, it's a victory for the group.
We think we've done our part. The French have understood us now. The French are starting to come out and join us. And that is how we can fight the system together.
Tonight they will sleep in a gym provided by the mayor here, but not every district was so welcoming.
We can catch Eve and Sonia's reports every weekday this week. But for the moment, though, that is it from me. I will be back, though, with more tomorrow, Mark.
Georgia, fantastic. Sad state of affairs for those people there in Aubervilliers.
It's a difficult position to be in.
Let's hope that something gets sorted out, because everyone deserves a roof over their head, don't they? Georgia, thank you very much indeed. Georgia, back tomorrow, of course. We're taking a short break after that. Another World News Update. Plus, we've got sport and focus. Stay with us, live from Paris.